Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Island of Dr. Moreau, Chapter 17, A Catastrophe. Scarcely 6 weeks passed before I had lost every feeling but dislike and abhorrence for this infamous experiment of Moreau's. My one idea was to get away from these horrible caricatures of my Maker's image, back to the sweet, wholesome intercourse of men. There's nothing wrong with that. My fellow creatures from whom I thus separated began to assume idyllic virtue and beauty in my memory. My first friendship with Montgomery did not increase. His long separation from humanity, his secret vice of drunkenness, his evident sympathy with the beast people tainted him to me. Several times I let him go alone among them. I avoided intercourse with them in every possible way. I spent an increasing portion of my time upon the beach, looking for some liberating sail that never appeared, until one day there fell upon us an appalling disaster, which put an altogether different aspect upon my strange surroundings. It was about 7 or 8 weeks after my landing, rather more, I think, though I had not troubled to keep account of the time, when this catastrophe occurred. It happened in the early morning, I should think about 6. I had risen and breakfast early, having been aroused by the noise of 3 beastmen carrying wood into the enclosure. After breakfast, I went to the open gateway of the enclosure, and stood there smoking a cigarette and enjoying the freshness of early morning. Moreau presently came around the corner of the enclosure and greeted me. He passed by me, and I heard him behind me unlock and enter his laboratory. So indurated was I at the time to the abomination of the place that I heard without a touch of emotion the puma victim beginning another day of torture. It met its persecutor with a shriek almost exactly like that of an angry virago. Then suddenly something happened. I do not know what to this day. I heard a short, sharp cry behind me, a fall, and turning saw the awful face rushing upon me. Not human, not animal, but hellish, brown, seeped with red branching scars. Red droplets stared out upon it, and the lidless eyes ablaze. I threw up my arms to defend myself from the blow that flung me headlong with a broken forearm, and the great monster, swathed in lint, with the red-stained bandages fluttering about it, leapt over me and passed. I rolled over and over down the beach, trying to sit up, and collapsed upon my broken arm. Then Moreau appeared, his massive white face all the more terrible for the blood that trickled from his forehead. He carried a revolver in one hand. He scarcely glanced at me, but rushed off at once in pursuit of the puma. I tried the other arm, and sat up. The muffled figure in front ran great striding leaps along the beach, and Moreau followed her. She turned her head and saw him, then doubling abruptly made for the bushes. She gained upon him at every stride. I saw her plunge into them, and Moreau, running slanting to intercept her, fired and missed as she disappeared. Then he too vanished in the green confusion. I stared after them, and then the pain in my arm flailed up, and with a groan I staggered to my feet. Montgomery appeared at the doorway, dressed with his revolver in hand. "Great God, Pendrick," he said, not noticing that I was hurt. "That brute's loose! Tore the fetter out of the wall! Have you seen them?" Then sharply seeing, I gripped my arm. "What's the matter?" "I was standing in the doorway," said I. He came forward and took my arm. "Blood on the sleeve," he said. Rolling back the flannel, he pocketed his weapon, felt my arm about painfully, and led me inside. "Your arm is broken," he said. "Then tell me exactly how it happened. What happened?" I told him what I had seen. Told him in broken sentences with gasps of pain between them, and very dexterously and swiftly he bound my arm. Meanwhile, he slung it from my shoulder, stood back and looked at me. "You'll do," he said. "And now?" He thought. Then he went and locked the gates of the enclosure. He was absent some time. I was chiefly concerned about my arm. The incident seemed merely one more of many horrible things. I sat down in the deck chair, and I must admit swore heartily at the island. The first dull feeling of injury in my arm already giving way to a burning pain when Montgomery reappeared. His face was rather pale, and he showed more of his lower gums than ever. "I can neither see nor hear anything of him," he said. "I've been thinking. He may want my help." He stared at me with his expressionless eyes. "That was a strong brute," he said. "It simply wrenched its fetters out of the wall." He went to the window, then to the door, and there turned to me. "I shall go after him," he said. "There's another revolver I can leave with you. To tell you the truth, I feel anxious somehow." He obtained the weapon and put it to my hand on the table, then went out, leaving a restless contagion in the air. I did not sit still long after he left, but took the revolver in hand and went to the doorway. The morning was still as death. Not a whisper of wind was stirring. The sea was like polished glass, the sky empty, the beach desolate. My half-excited, half-feverish state, the stillness of things oppressed me. I tried to whistle, and the tune died away. I swore again, the second time that morning. Then I went to the corner of the enclosure and stared inland at the green brush that had swallowed up Moreau and Montgomery. When would they return, and how? Then, far away up the beach, a little gray beast man appeared, ran down to the water's edge, and began splashing about. I strolled back to the doorway, then to the corner again, and so began pacing to and fro, like a sentinel upon duty. Once I was arrested by the distant voice of Montgomery bawling, "Cooey! Moreau!" My arm became less painful, but very hot. I got feverish and thirsty. My shadow grew shorter. I watched the distant figure until it went away again. Would Moreau and Montgomery ever return? 3 seabirds began fighting for some stranded treasure. Then, from far away behind the enclosure, I heard a pistol shot. A long silence, then came another, then a yelling cry nearer, and another dismal gap of silence. My unfortunate imagination set to work to torment me. Then suddenly a shot close by. I went to the corner, startled, and saw Montgomery, his face scarlet, his hair disordered, and the knee of his trousers torn. His face expression profound consternation. Behind him slouched the beast man, Maling, and round Maling's jaws were some queer, dark stains. "Has he come?" said Montgomery. "Moreau?" I said. "No." My God! The man was panting, almost slobbering. "Go back in," he said, taking my arm. "They're mad. They're all rushing about mad. What can have happened? I don't know. I tell you, when my breath comes. Where's some brandy?" Montgomery limped before me into the room and sat down in the desk chair. Maling flung himself down just outside the doorway and began panting like a dog. I got Montgomery some brandy and water. He sat staring in front of him at nothing, recovering his breath. After some minutes, he began to tell me what happened. He had followed their track for some way. It was plain enough at first on account of the crushed and broken bushes, white rags torn from the puma's bandage, and occasionally smears of blood on the leaves or shrubs and undergrowth. He lost the track, however, on the stony ground beyond the stream where I had seen the beast man drink, and went wandering aimlessly towards, shouting Moreau's name. Then Maling had come to him carrying a light hatchet. Maling had seen nothing of the puma affair, and had been felling wood, and heard him calling. They went on shouting together. 2 beast men came crouching and peering at them through the undergrowth, with gestures and furtive carriage that alarmed Montgomery by their strangeness. He hailed them, and they fled guiltily. He stopped shouting after that, and after wandering some time further in an undecided way, determined to visit the huts. He found the ravine deserted. Growing more alarmed every minute, he began to retrace his steps. Then it was he encountered the 2 swine men I had seen dancing the night of my arrival. Blood-stained, they were about the mouth, and intensely excited. They came crashing through the ferns and stopped with fierce faces when they saw him. He cracked his whip in some trepidation, and forthwith they rushed at him. Never before had a beast man dared do that. One he shot through the head. Maling flung himself upon the other, and the 2 rolled grappling. Maling got his brute under, and with his teeth in its throat, and Montgomery shot that too, as it struggled in Maling's grip. He had some difficulty in introducing Maling to come away with him. Thence they had hurried back to me. On the way, Maling had suddenly rushed into a thicket and driven out an undersized ocelot man, also blood-stained and lame through a wound in the foot. This brute had run a little way and then turned savagely at bay, and Montgomery, with a certain wantonness, I thought, had shot him. "What does it all mean?" said I. He shook his head and turned once more to the brandy. Chapter 18. The Finding of Moreau. When I saw Montgomery swallow a 3rd dose of brandy, I took it upon myself to interfere. He was already more than half fuddled. I told him that some serious thing must have happened to Moreau by this time, or he would have returned before this, and that it behooved us to assert what that catastrophe was. Montgomery raised some feeble objections, and at last agreed. We had some food, and then all 3 of us started. It is possible, due to the tension of my mind at the time, but even now that start into the hot stillness of the tropical afternoon is singularly vivid impression. Maling was first, his shoulders hunched, his strange black head moving with quick starts as he peered first on one side of the way, then on that. He was unarmed. His axe had dropped when he encountered the swine men. Teeth was his weapon when it came to fighting. Montgomery followed with stumbling footsteps, his hand in his pockets, his face downcast. He was in a state of muddled sullenness with me on account of my brandy. My left arm was in a sling. It was lucky it was my left, and I carried my revolver in my right. Soon we traced a narrow path through the wild luxuriance of the island, going northwestward, and presently Maling stopped and became rigid with watchfulness. Montgomery almost staggered into him and then stopped, then listened intently. We heard coming through the trees the sound of voices and footsteps approaching us. "Is he dead?" said a deep, vibrating voice. "He is not dead! He is not dead!" jabbered another. We saw! said several voices. "Hello!" suddenly shouted Montgomery. "Hello there!" "Confound you!" I said, and gripped my pistol. There was a silence. Then a crash among the interlacing vegetation, first here, then there. And then 6 faces appeared, strange faces, lit by a strange light. Maling made a growling noise in his throat. I recognized the ape-man. I had indeed already identified his voice, and 2 of the white-swathed, brown-featured creatures I had seen in Montgomery's boat. With these were 2 dappled brutes and a gray, horribly crooked creature, who said the law, with the gray hair streaming down its cheeks, heavy gray eyebrows, and gray locks pouring off from a central parting along its sloping forehead. A heavy, faceless thing, with strange red eyes, looking at us curiously from amidst the green. For a space no one spoke. Then Montgomery hiccuped. "Who said he was dead?" The monkey man looked guiltily at the hairy gray thing. "He is dead," said the monster. "They saw." There was nothing threatening about this detachment, at any rate. They seemed awestruck and puzzled. "Where is he?" said Montgomery. "Beyond." "Is there a law now?" asked the monkey man. "Is it still to be this and that? Is he dead indeed?" "Is there a law?" repeated the man in white. "Is there a law, thou other with the whip?" "He is dead," said the gray-haired thing, and they all stood watching us. "Prendick," said Montgomery, turning his dull eyes to me. "He's dead, evidently." I had been standing behind him during this colloquy. I began to see how things lay with him. I suddenly stopped in front of Montgomery and lifted up my voice. "Children of the law," said I, "he is not dead." Maling turned his sharp eyes on me. "He has changed his shape. He has changed his body," I went on. "For a time you will not see him. He is there." I pointed upward, "where he can watch you. You cannot see him, but he can see you. Fear the law." I looked at them squarely. They flinched. "He is great, he is good," said the ape-man, peering fearfully upward among the dense trees. "And the other thing?" I demanded. "The thing that bled and ran and screaming and sobbing, that is dead too," said the gray thing, still regarding me. "That's well," grunted Montgomery. "The other with the whip," began the gray thing. "Well," I said he was dead." But Montgomery was still sober enough to understand my motive in denying Moreau's death. "He's not dead," he said slowly. "Not dead at all. No more dead than I am." "Some," I said, "have broken the law. They will die. Some have died. Show us where his old body lies, the body he cast away before he had no more need of it." "It is this way, man who walks in sea," said the gray thing. And with these 6 creatures guiding us, we went through the tumult of ferns and creepers and tree stems towards the northwest. Then came a yelling, a crashing among the branches, and a little pink homunculus rushed by us, shrieking. Immediately after appeared a monster in headlong pursuit. Blood bedabbled, who was amongst us almost before he could stop his carrier. The gray thing leapt aside. Mei-ling, with a snarl, flew at it and was struck aside. Montgomery fired and missed, bowed his head, threw up his arm, and turned to run. I fired, and the thing still came on. Fired again, point blank into its ugly face. I saw its feature vanish in a flash. Its face was driven in. Yet it passed me, gripped Montgomery, and holding him, fell headlong beside him and pulled him sprawling upon itself in its death agony. I found myself alone with Mei-ling, the dead brute, and the prostrate man. Montgomery raised himself slowly and stared in a muddled way at the shattered beast man beside him. It more than half sobered him. He scrambled to his feet. Then I saw the gray thing return cautiously through the trees. "See?" I said, pointing to the dead brute. "It is the law, not alive. This comes of breaking the law." He peered at the body. "He sends the fire that kills," said he, in his deep voice, repeating part of the ritual. The others gathered round to stare for a space. At last we drew near the westward extreme of the island. We came upon the gnawed and mutilated body of the puma, its shoulder bone smashed by a bullet, and perhaps 20 yards farther found at last what we sought. Moreau lay face down in a trampled space in a canebrake. One hand was almost severed at the wrist, and his silvery hair was dabbled in blood. His head had been battered in by the fetters of the puma. The broken canes beneath him were smeared with blood. His revolver we could not find. Montgomery turned him over, resting at intervals, and with the help of 7 beast people, for he was a heavy man, we carried Moreau back to the enclosure. That night was darkling. Twice we heard unseen creatures howling and shrieking past our little band, and once the little pink sloth creature appeared and stared at us and vanished again. But we were attacked again. At the gates of the enclosure, our company of beast people left us, Mei-ling going with the rest. We locked ourselves in, and then took Moreau's mangled body into the yard and laid it upon a pile of brushwood. Then we went into the laboratory and put an end to all we found living there. So quoth this raven, "My darlings, it means so much to me that you come and listen to my little stories. I so appreciate it, but if you did like it, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe so you can come back and hear more. My dearest thanks to my supporters, past and present. It means so much to me. Have a lovely day, my darling.